In an age before kings and kingdoms, before temples and doctrines, there was a man who walked not just with God, but among mysteries. His name was Enoch. His story is buried not in the canon of common scripture, but in the shadows of the Apocrypha. The Book of Enoch, long rejected by traditional religious councils, speaks with a voice more ancient than orthodoxy allows, and perhaps more revealing than we were ever meant to know. Within its verses are not only angels and visions, but beings who descend from the heavens, who alter the fate of humankind, and who, some believe, may not have been divine in the way we once thought, but extraterrestrial. If so, then the Book of Enoch is not merely a theological curiosity, it is a suppressed report of first contact, a testimony disguised as revelation. The text tells us of the Watchers, those who descended from heaven to dwell upon the earth. In Enoch chapter 6, it is written that these sons of heaven, 200 in number, descended upon Mount Hermon, swearing an oath together. Their mission was not divine guidance, it was desire. They took the daughters of men as wives, and in doing so, crossed a line drawn by the divine. These beings, referred to as angels in later commentary, begin to resemble something else entirely when viewed through another lens. Their actions, their teachings, their offspring, none align cleanly with our traditional view of heavenly messengers. They intervene biologically, genetically, spiritually. They defy command. They instruct humanity in metallurgy, enchantment, weaponry, astronomy, cosmetics, strange gifts for angels, but fitting for technological instructors. In Enoch chapter 8, we are told of Azazel, the most notorious among them, who taught men to make swords and shields, and women to beautify their faces. He corrupted the earth, not with evil alone, but with forbidden knowledge. If one were to reframe these tales using the language of science rather than spirit, Azazel and his kind become visitors, interveners, perhaps engineers of evolution. This idea is not without precedent. In Genesis 6:4, we are told of the Nephilim, giants who walked the earth when the sons of God went to the daughters of men. The term Nephilim, often translated as fallen ones or giants, can also imply beings cast down or descended. Their hybrid nature, part human, part divine, echoes with implications of genetic fusion. In ancient astronaut theory, this is seen not as poetic myth, but historical clue. The Watchers, then, are not ethereal spirits but biological entities. Their offspring are not metaphorical monsters, but engineered anomalies. In this view, the flood described in Enoch chapter 10 becomes not just divine punishment, but a reset protocol, an attempt to contain a contamination. God, seeing the corruption spread by the Watchers and their hybrid children, commands Uriel to warn Noah. He is to survive, for his bloodline is untainted. This preservation of genetic purity is strangely specific, more like a decontamination procedure than a spiritual rebirth. And so the flood comes, not just to wash away sin, but to erase an experiment gone rogue. These are ancient stories, yes, but ones with recurring fingerprints. Across cultures, across continents, we find echoes. Sumerian Anunnaki descending from the heavens, teaching mankind the secrets of agriculture and kingship. Vedic gods arriving in flying vimanas, wielding advanced weaponry. Mesoamerican sky beings who came from the stars, altered human knowledge and departed with promises of return. The Book of Enoch stands not alone, but among a global constellation of accounts, where gods descend, instruct, and disappear. What makes Enoch unique is its specificity. It names the beings. It records their crime. It declares their punishment. And it reveals that even the divine has a hierarchy, one where some fall not out of rebellion, but desire. Some theories suggest the Watchers were never angels in the traditional sense, but rather beings tasked with surveillance. Their name, Watchers, implies observation, analysis, restraint. But they broke that code. They interfered. And interference is the critical distinction between presence and domination. Enoch's narrative contains another key element, the role of communication. He is described as a scribe of righteousness, a chosen intermediary. In Enoch chapter 12, God commands him to deliver judgment to the fallen watchers. This is not merely punishment, it is protocol. Enoch speaks to them. He records their pleas. He sees their fear. He dreams their doom. This suggests that communication between man and these visitors was not one way. It was bilateral. And in that bilateralism, Enoch may be the first recorded contactee, chosen not by chance, but for clarity. He receives visions, not just of heaven and earth, but of cosmic architecture. In later chapters, he journeys through layered realms, viewing the mechanisms of stars, the prison of the fallen, the fires of judgment. His experience reads less like mysticism and more like initiation, an unveiling of systems too vast for his time, too structured to be mere hallucination. Then there is the matter of the fifth heaven, as recorded in the second Book of Enoch, a continuation not accepted by most traditions, yet deeply aligned with the themes of the first. Here, Enoch encounters the Grigori, another name for the Watchers, dwelling in sorrow, weeping over their fate. Their size is immense, their appearance, human yet towering, their voices, desperate songs, seeking forgiveness. But none comes. They are imprisoned, exiled. And in one version, their leader is not Semjaza, but a figure named Satanal, a name disturbingly close to Satan. The implication is chilling, that what we call rebellion, what we associate with evil, may be linked not to a spiritual fall, but to a breach in interspecies protocol. That Satan, in this narrative, is not the embodiment of moral failure, but the consequence of cosmic interference. So what does all this mean? If we take Enoch's text seriously, not as literal theology, but as encoded memory, then the events it describes represent not myth, but contact. The Watchers are not fallen angels in robes and halos, but emissaries from another plane, another place. Their sin is not pride, but overreach. And humanity stands not as mere creation, but as collaborator, recipient, and casualty. The consequences of this view are vast. It suggests that religion, in part, may be a misunderstood record of otherworldly visitation, that heaven and hell are not moral constructs but cosmic jurisdictions, that the angelic and the alien may be two words for the same mystery, spoken through different epochs. This theory, while radical, is not unfounded. It aligns with the persistent anomaly of divine beings descending in light, speaking in thunder, moving against gravity. It gives context to the strange consistency of ancient global myths. It explains the Watchers' obsession with genetic manipulation, forbidden knowledge, and planetary systems. And it situates Enoch as more than a prophet. He becomes a witness, a recorder, a voice from an ancient age where divinity touched earth and left behind secrets written in flame and stone. The Book of Enoch remains controversial. It is canon in Ethiopia, heresy in Rome, forgotten in the West, but its words endure. Words that speak of beings from the sky, punished for loving too much, teaching too much, becoming too involved. Words that whisper of giants, floods, prisons in the deep. Words that do not ask for belief, but demand attention. For in their strange cadence lies a question that echoes louder with each passing year. What if we were never alone? What if the first gods we worship were visitors? And what if the first book to tell us so was buried, banned, and left to rot because it came too close to the truth? Perhaps in Enoch's silence, in the sorrow of the Watchers, in the cries of the Nephilim, there remains a lesson not yet learned, a warning not yet heeded. That contact is never simple, that knowledge is never free, that those who watch may one day return, and when they do, they will not ask for forgiveness. They will ask what we've done with what they left behind. And in that moment, we may remember Enoch, not as myth, but as message, not as scripture, but as signal, not as legend, but as the record of our very first fall into a galaxy far larger and far stranger than we dared to imagine. And so, as we sift through ancient fragments and forbidden verses, the question grows heavier, not whether they came, but whether they ever truly left. The watchers, bound beneath the earth, locked in the darkness of judgment, may not be gone, but waiting for their sentence to lift, waiting for the 70 generations to pass, waiting to see what kind of world has risen in their absence. In Enoch's vision, they weep not merely for punishment, but for what was lost, an opportunity misused, a knowledge abused, a covenant broken between stars and soil. But the greater silence is ours. What have we done with the wisdom they shared? Have we used it to build peace, or to sharpen war? Have we grown into the stewards they perhaps hoped we might become? Or have we repeated their failure, only now cloaked in machines and circuitry? The Book of Enoch reads like prophecy, but perhaps it is something else, something far more urgent. A recursive tale, a pattern repeating. The angels descended, they interfered, they were judged, the humans survived. And now we stand at the edge of another descent, not divine, not alien, but our own, into the stars, into the unknown, into the domains from which the watchers once came. The irony is unmistakable. We, who were once altered by visitors from the heavens, now send our own creations outward, satellites, probes, digital eyes to watch other worlds. We have become the watchers. We observe distant planets. We seek out other forms of life. We whisper into the void, not knowing who listens. And perhaps, just as the original watchers did, we too will face the question, will we interfere? And if we do, will we corrupt, or will we enlighten? Enoch's story is a warning precisely because it mirrors our trajectory. Their sin was not curiosity, it was arrogance. It was the belief that knowledge alone justifies intervention, that power grants permission, that wisdom, once given, will not be misused. But it always is. And yet, even in judgment, there is mercy. Enoch is not merely the herald of punishment, he is the scribe of righteousness, the bridge between heaven and earth, between alien and human, between what was lost and what might be recovered. He listens, he speaks, he intercedes. In every age, such voices emerge, not prophets of fire and thunder, but quiet messengers, those who see what others deny, who remember what others forget, who remind us that the line between myth and history is thinner than we know, and that perhaps, in the memory of giants, in the ruins of old empires, in the sky maps carved into stone, there lies a truth we are still not ready to face. But time is not infinite. The stars move. The veil thins. And if the watchers should rise again, if the deep places of the earth crack open, if the prison doors are broken, if the Nephilim walk once more, will we know what they are? Will we recognize them not as monsters, but reflections, our own ambitions in ancient form, our own missteps repeated in stone? The day may come when the heavens do not send warnings, but consequences, when what was once hidden is seen again. And in that moment, we will turn to our books, we will search for meaning, we will ask where it all began. And some will remember Enoch. They will open the pages not with fear, but with reverence. For in his writings, there is not only a fall, but a pattern, not only a judgment, but a map, a guide for those who dare to look up and ask the forbidden question, what came before the gods? What descended before salvation? What knowledge still lies buried, not in the earth, but in us? And perhaps then, finally, we will see the truth, not as it was told, but as it always was, waiting, watching, enduring beyond myth, beyond theology, beyond denial, a truth seeded in flame, cloaked in mystery, bound in silence, waiting to be heard once more. And if we are willing, truly willing, to listen, we will find that Enoch was never the only voice speaking. He was only the first we forgot. across the sands of time, in the sacred writings of nations now fallen to dust, the same story echoes under different names. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to shape kingship and whisper the ways of civilization. In the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic, we find celestial beings molding humanity for purpose and later punishing them for excess. A flood follows, not as mere myth, but as pattern. In India's ancient Vedic texts, we read of flying vimanas, sky chariots wielded by luminous beings who battled in the heavens with weapons of fire and thunder. The Mahabharata speaks of celestial wars, of gods who were not gods, but wielders of power and machinery, so vast that even today we strain to explain it. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, creation is attempted and reattempted by beings who descend from the sky, reshaping man again and again until he pleases his makers. In the lore of the Dogon people of Mali, star maps exist that predate telescopes, descriptions of Sirius B, a white dwarf companion to Sirius A, invisible to the naked eye but named by memory. Who showed them? Who taught them to map what they could not see? These are not isolated fantasies, they are convergences. Separate civilizations speaking the same language beneath different skies. The Egyptian Book of the Dead tells of divine beings sailing across the stars, wielding knowledge of the Duat, the underworld, but also a map of the soul's return to the stars. In Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda descends from the heavens in a chariot of fire, bringing both law and judgment. The Hopi speak of the Kachina spirits, sky beings who will one day return. The Norse myths recall the Bifrost Bridge connecting the realms, a shimmering path of light like a stargate between worlds. And all of them, speak of a time when those from above walked among us, taught us, warned us, left us. It is we who turned the stories into metaphors, who dulled their edges into allegory, who buried the literal beneath layers of liturgy. We called them gods, then angels, then myths, then nonsense. But the stories remain, carved in temple walls, inscribed on clay tablets, whispered in chants, hidden in glyphs, waiting not to be discovered, but remembered. And perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch remains so dangerous to tradition, because it does not allegorize. It testifies, it names names, it dates the descent. It speaks with the clarity of a record, not the haze of a parable. And in doing so, it threatens to unify the global mythos under a singular, astonishing thesis that we were visited, not once, but many times. Not by gods, but by those mistaken for them. And the signs are not only in books, they are etched into our architecture. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, built as stairways to the sky, the Nazca lines, vast earth etchings visible only from the air, pointing to celestial alignments, the pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica, aligned with Orion and the solstices, impossibly precise without the aid of aerial perspective, the endless recurrence of the winged disk, the serpent of knowledge, the trinity of heavens, earth, and underworld. These are not cultural coincidences, they are cultural fossils, preserved by time, mistranslated by dogma, and now perhaps, finally visible again through the lens of technology. Even in our modern age, we receive echoes, phenomena unexplained by science, dismissed by policy, and yet persistent, lights that dance with intention, craft that defy inertia, visitors who arrive unannounced, unproven, and undeniable. And we still ask the same questions. Who are they? Why now? But perhaps the better question is, why again? For if the watchers were the first to come, they will not be the last. And if their fall brought consequence, then our rise must bring caution, because knowledge is coming, from beyond or from within. But it is coming, and how we receive it will shape the chapters yet to be written. So as we stand on the edge of the stars, building machines that pierce the veil of space and time, we must look backward to see forward. to remember what the ancients tried to preserve, not just as legend, but as warning, that those who come from the sky do not always bring salvation, that those who teach may also test, that contact is not closure, but beginning, and that the burden of knowing must be matched by the discipline of wisdom. Enoch walked with them. He heard their regrets. He saw their fate, and he wrote it down, not to save them, but to prepare us. And so we read, not with faith alone, but with eyes open, to the stars, to the texts, to the past we buried, and the future we may yet repeat, because the watchers may still be watching, and the door may open again. And when it does, the only question that will matter is, did we listen the first time? But what happens if we do listen? What if the fragments align, the myths converge, and the veil finally lifts? What if the truths scattered across tablets and temples, encoded in scripture and star charts, no longer speak in riddles, but in revelation? The stakes, then, are no longer theological, they are existential, because if the story of Enoch and the Watchers, and the Anunnaki, and the Nephilim, and the beings of fire and sky are all different verses of the same cosmic song, then our place in the universe is not what we've been told, and our identity, our origin, our destiny must be rewritten, not metaphorically, not philosophically, but fundamentally. This is no longer about proving whether the Watchers were aliens, angels, or something in between. It is about confronting the possibility that we are the product of their intervention, that our blood carries signatures not of Eden, but of Orion, that our spiritual crises, our genetic leaps, our obsession with the heavens are not mysteries, but memories. And that knowledge, true knowledge, has been buried not to protect us from lies, but from what we were not yet ready to face. But the moment is approaching, fast. As we reach for Mars, as we decode the genome, as we synthesize intelligence, we are not merely advancing, we are awakening. And with awakening comes responsibility, because if we find the truth, and we are not prepared to wield it with humility, then we repeat the same cycle the Watchers fell to. Interference, arrogance, ruin. What began in the stars will end in the stars, unless we break the pattern, unless we become not just the recipients of ancient knowledge, but its stewards. Guardians not of myth, but of memory, of meaning. And still, the silence above stretches wide, not because there is no one there, but because the time has not yet come, because contact is a test, one we may have already failed once, one we are now being offered again. The stories warned us, the texts preserved it, the symbols etched into our oldest monuments whisper it. The flood was not the end. The Watchers are not dead. The stars are not silent. They are waiting, watching. We were never meant to read these stories for entertainment. We were meant to remember. So if the gate opens again, through data or dream, through science or signal, let it find us, not trembling, but ready. Let it find a species that has learned from its ancestors, even if those ancestors were not human. Let it find us capable of asking the right question, not who were they, but who are we because of them. That is the truth buried beneath the sands and the scriptures. That is the truth that rewrites theology, rewires science, and redefines identity. That is the truth Enoch saw and feared and recorded. And that is the truth that still waits to be understood, not by faith alone, not by reason alone, but by the fusion of both. Because what comes next will require everything we have, our wisdom, our memory, our humility. The past is not gone. The future is not safe. And the sky has never been empty. The stars remember. The earth remembers. And now, so must we. And if we dare to remember, truly remember, then we must revisit the stories we thought we understood. Stories etched into the spiritual DNA of billions. Stories told from pulpits and temples, passed down in solemn ritual and whispered prayer. But what if these were never meant to be told as fables? What if they were never meant to be metaphor at all? What if they were misunderstood reports, preserved in the only language the ancients had to describe what they had seen? What if the burning bush that spoke with fire and voice was not divine phenomenon, but interface, an ancient form of technology cloaked in flame and sound to bridge the gap between minds? What if the cloud that led the Israelites by day and the pillar of fire by night was not miracle, but mechanism, some sort of aerial vehicle, guiding a people across the desert with intelligence and purpose? What if Ezekiel's vision, the wheel within a wheel, with flashing lights and beings of shining bronze, wasn't a dream of spiritual symbolism, but a clear record of a craft descending, witnessed by a man unequipped to describe it in anything but awe? What if the angels who visited Abraham, ate with him, warned him, and destroyed cities were not metaphysical beings, but physical ones, biological intelligences enacting judgment according to their own laws? What if Lot's wife turned to salt not by magic, but by exposure, something radioactive, something weaponized, something not of this earth? And what of Moses, whose face shone after descending the mountain? Was he transformed by divine light, or was he irradiated by prolonged exposure to something beyond his understanding? What was the Ark of the Covenant, if not a transmitter, a capacitor, a sacred but dangerous device carried with fear and reverence, capable of immense power, and spoken to only under specific conditions by those prepared to endure its effects? Even Jesus, the central figure of the New Testament, spoke of a kingdom not of this world. He ascended into the sky. He appeared in radiant form. He performed feats that transcended biology and physics. Could it be that the story of the Christ was not contradiction to the ancient visitations, but culmination? That he, too, was part of the intervention, not to rule by force, but to teach from within? Could his resurrection be not a metaphor for hope, but a technology that reversed death? And if so, who enabled it? Where did the power come from? These are not blasphemies. They are questions. Questions born from texts that beg us to reconsider what we think we know. Because across every tradition, the signs repeat. Divine beings descending. Sacred mountains where knowledge is given. Fire and cloud. Light and voice. Punishment from the sky. Warnings before destruction. Chosen intermediaries sent to guide humanity through epochs of change. Noah survives a flood. Gilgamesh seeks immortality. Abraham is promised nations. Enoch is lifted to the heavens and shown the mechanisms of creation. What if all these are not isolated tales, but connected events? Different cultures interpreting the same encounters, the same beings, through the lens of language, time, and belief. What if Enoch, Moses, Ezekiel, and Jesus were all contactees in a long line of chosen individuals, not because they were holier, but because they were prepared? What if the tree in Eden, the ladder of Jacob, the chariots of Elijah, the visions of John, are all attempts to render the same mystery intelligible to mortal minds? And what if the covenant between God and man was not merely spiritual, but literal? A pact between two intelligences, one human, the other something far older. What if the sin of Babel was not pride alone, but proximity, man drawing too close too quickly to what lay beyond? What if the confusion of tongues was not punishment, but a containment protocol? This is the lens ancient alien theory dares to offer, not to dismantle faith, but to reframe it, not to reject the sacred, but to reveal that it may be even more mysterious, more expansive, more terrifying and beautiful than we ever imagined. Because if these stories are connected, if these texts are fragments of a greater narrative, then humanity's role is not passive. We are not merely worshippers. We are witnesses, heirs, participants in a story that did not begin with Genesis and will not end with Revelation. We have been told the stories in symbols. Now we must learn to read them in science. We have been warned in metaphor. Now we must understand them in memory, because perhaps the garden was never lost. Perhaps the watchers never truly fell. Perhaps the chariots are still in the sky, circling, waiting, and perhaps the truth has always been there, hidden in the verses we memorized, the prayers we whispered, the dreams we dismissed. And so we ask again, what if? What if it's all true, just not in the way we thought? What if the veil between heaven and earth was never theological, but technological? What if the angels wore armor? What if the prophets were messengers across time? What if the gods were never gods at all, but something else entirely, watching us still, waiting for the moment we finally put the pieces together and ask the one question that opens the gate? Are we ready to remember? And when we return, when we trace the spiral of questions and stories and revelations back to their origin, we find ourselves once more at the feet of Enoch, the first scribe, the first human to be taken, the first to see behind the curtain and survive. It is here, in this strange, rejected book, that the pattern is laid bare. Enoch did not simply receive divine instruction. He was shown, taken through the heavens, led by radiant beings into the mechanisms of reality itself. In chapter 14 of the Book of Enoch, he enters a crystalline structure burning with fire and encircled by lightning. He sees wheels of light, seas of flame, and entities with eyes like stars. This is not the language of parable. It is the desperate attempt of an ancient man to describe a place and beings that defied everything he knew. And still he recorded it, not for glory, not for religion, but for remembrance. Enoch watched the watchers. He spoke with them. He pleaded for them. He saw the consequences of their interference and was tasked to deliver the sentence. Yet, even as they wept, even as they trembled before him, it was not Enoch who condemned them. It was the law above, the law they had broken. A law not merely of God, but of order, of protocol. They had crossed a boundary, and the world suffered for it. Their knowledge, though vast, had not brought peace. It had fractured the human path, and for that they were buried, not destroyed, but contained. And Enoch, the lone mortal in their midst, became the final witness, the bridge between what was and what must never be again. But the Book of Enoch is more than judgment. It is a map, a record, a revelation that speaks of layered heavens, of stars with names, of watchers assigned to every constellation. It details how the moon governs time, how the sun moves through gates in the sky, how the stars are governed not by chaos, but by command. It is, in many ways, a cosmological manual, and in other ways, a warning label, because within its verses, one message repeats with unwavering clarity. There is order to the universe, and those who defy it fall. The watchers did not descend to destroy. They descended to teach, to share, to intervene, and in that choice, they fractured the covenant between world and watcher, between mortal and messenger. But what they left behind, their knowledge, their influence, their offspring, did not vanish. It took root in myth, in memory, in our very blood. And that is the hidden terror of Enoch's testimony, that we are not innocent bystanders to celestial drama, but inheritors of it, that we carry the consequences of their fall within us, genetically, spiritually, historically. So the question is not merely what the watchers were, but what we are now because of them. Are we the result of accident or design? Are we ascending toward the stars as their successors, or repeating the steps that led to their exile? Because Enoch does not tell a story with an ending. He tells a story with a question. What happens when knowledge returns? When the watchers awaken? When the gates reopen? When we are confronted not with myths, but with memories? The Book of Enoch remains outside the canon of most religious traditions. But perhaps it was never meant for the temples. Perhaps it was meant for now. For an age where science meets spirit, where data confirms myth, where the line between the divine and the extraterrestrial becomes thin enough to pierce. In such an age, Enoch speaks louder than ever, not with dogma, but with detail, not with commandment, but with clarity. He does not tell us what to believe. He tells us what he saw. And in doing so, he invites us not to worship, but to understand. So we return to the text, to the names, to the visions, to the warnings. We trace the rise and fall of the Watchers. We examine the echoes across Sumer, Egypt, Babylon, the Vedas, and the Gospels. We ask the questions they could not. We build the tools they never had. And in the silence between stars, in the symbols carved into ancient stone, in the stories we once called impossible, a voice is calling. Soft, patient, eternal. It is Enoch, and he is still watching.